Emergency meeting of the Galactic Council Medical Advisory Board is now in session, announced High Administrator Vex'tuul, his three eye stalks quivering with anxiety. The situation is grave, colleagues, absolutely grave. The assembled members of the board, representing 17 different sentient species from across the known galaxy, shifted uncomfortably in their ergonomically customized seating arrangements. The chamber's environmental controls were carefully calibrated to accommodate the diverse biological needs of all present, and yet an unmistakable chill had settled over the room. "I assume this is about the humans," said Dr. Plink, a gelatinous cyan-colored physician whose body rippled with each syllable. Vex'tuul's central eye blinked rapidly. "Indeed. As you're all aware, we've been monitoring their civilization since they achieved primitive space travel. But recent diplomatic developments have forced our hand. They've been invited to attend the next Galactic Summit." A collective gasp echoed through the chamber, followed by various species-specific expressions of distress. Some tentacles coiled tightly, membranes fluttered, and in one case defensive spines involuntarily deployed. "But they're from a Deathworld," protested Medical Officer Zorn, a methane breather whose hazard suit wheezed with each agitated breath. "Their planet has crushing gravity, corrosive oxygen atmosphere, temperature fluctuations that would kill most civilized beings, and liquid water just everywhere. Not to mention," added Dr. Kazes, nervously grooming her antennae, "their physiology is terrifying. Their endoskeletons are made of calcium, an actual metal encased in self-healing protein fibers. They regularly ingest substances that would be considered toxic waste on most habitable worlds, and they can survive partial dismemberment." Vex'tuul raised two appendages to quiet the growing commotion. Yes, we're all aware of humanity's unsettling characteristics. That's precisely why we've called this emergency session. The diplomatic corps needs our help." He activated a holographic display showing detailed biological scans of a human specimen. Several council members averted their visual receptors. "The council representatives who must interact with these creatures will need medical intervention to handle the psychological stress," Vex'tuul continued. "We need to develop a pharmaceutical solution, and quickly." Dr. Plink oozed forward slightly. "You mean anti-anxiety medication customized for interspecies diplomacy?" "Precisely," nodded Vex'tuul. "Something to suppress the natural fight or flight response when confronted with these walking disaster survival machines." The chamber's data specialist, a cybernetically enhanced avian named Chirp, projected statistical analyses onto the central display. "According to our research, humans routinely survive conditions that would be fatal to 97.3% of council species. They can repair broken bones, replace damaged organs, and some have even survived having their hearts temporarily stop functioning." "Don't forget their terrifying reproductive process," muttered someone from the back row. "Enough." Vex'tuul's voice resonated with authority. "We have exactly 38 standard cycles before the humans arrive at the Galactic Summit. We need a solution that will allow our diplomats to maintain composure when faced with these creatures." Dr. Kazes reluctantly raised a forelimb. "I've been studying Earth's pharmaceutical compounds. Perhaps we could synthesize something based on their own anti-anxiety medications, modified for our various physiologies." "An excellent starting point," Vex'tuul agreed. "But we'll need to account for the extreme psychological response these humans trigger. This isn't simple nervousness, it's existential terror." The medical board spent the next several hours drafting protocols and compound formulations. Teams were assigned, research priorities established, and emergency production facilities requisitioned. As the meeting concluded, Dr. Plink approached Vex'tuul privately. "Administrator, have you actually met a human yourself?" Vex'tuul's eye stalks drooped slightly. "Once, during a preliminary contact mission. Their representative shook my appendage, actually grasped it with their 5-fingered manipulator, and I required 3 cycles of intensive therapy afterward. And yet they've been invited to the summit. Who authorized this madness?" Vex'tuul sighed. A sound like escaping steam made the Trade Commission. "Apparently, humans have resources other species want. Politics trumps safety, as always." As the council members departed, Medical Officer Zorn lingered to examine the human biological schematics once more. Looking at these readings, Zorn muttered, "These creatures don't just survive on their death world, they thrive there. Imagine what they could endure if they had to. Stars help us if they ever decide we're in their way." Vex'tuul shut down the display with a decisive gesture. "That, Officer Zorn, is precisely why we need these medications to work. Diplomacy may be our only defense against the Deathworlders." Ambassador Thrix of the Maluvian Confederation stared at the small purple pill in his spindly three-fingered hand. The medication, officially labeled diplomatic anxiety suppression treatment, but already nicknamed human pills. By the staff glistened under the soft light of his private quarters aboard the Galactic Summit station. "Are the side effects really worth it?" he asked the medical officer hovering nearby. Dr. Glix, whose exoskeleton clicked softly with each movement, nodded all four of her sensory nodes. "The alternative is potentially worse, Ambassador. Unmedicated exposure to humans has been known to cause molt-inducing panic in several species. One Praxian diplomat experienced spontaneous hibernation after merely viewing uncensored footage of a human engaging in their recreational activity called parkour." Thrix shuddered, his translucent skin momentarily revealing the nervous system beneath. "I've read the briefing materials. These creatures are unsettling." "Indeed," Dr. Glix agreed, pulling up a holographic file. "Just yesterday I reviewed the case of a human who survived after being impaled by a metal rod. Instead of gracefully accepting their demise as any reasonable being would, their medical professionals simply removed the foreign object and repaired the damage. The human returned to full functionality within weeks." "Barbaric," whispered Thrix. "There's more," Dr. Glix continued, clearly distressed despite her own preventative medication. "They willingly expose themselves to dangerous radiation from their primary star for cosmetic purposes. They regularly consume neurotoxins for pleasure. Some participate in activities where they jump from high places with nothing but fabric to slow their descent." Ambassador Thrix's breathing filtration membranes fluttered rapidly. "And I'm expected to sit across from these monsters and discuss trade agreements?" "Hence the medication." Dr. Glix gestured toward the pill still clutched in Thrix's trembling hand. "It will modulate your neurological responses, preventing instinctive terror while maintaining cognitive function. You may experience some minor perceptual alterations." "Define minor," Thrix interrupted. "Nothing serious. Perhaps slight color distortion, minor auditory hallucinations, or temporary belief that you understand the human sense of humor." She adjusted a dial on her medical scanner. "The dosage is calibrated to your specific physiology. We've added a mild euphoric component to counterbalance the natural dread these creatures evoke." Thrix sighed, a whistling sound through his respiratory slits. "I suppose it's necessary." He placed the pill against his absorption membrane and watched it dissolve. "How long before it takes effect?" "Approximately 17 minutes. Just enough time to review your diplomatic protocols one last time." Dr. Glix handed him a data tablet. "Remember, Ambassador, no sudden movements around the humans. They might interpret it as a threat, and their threat response is excessive." Thrix nodded gravely as he scrolled through the human interaction guidelines. "Do not comment on the humans' bizarre bilateral symmetry. Avoid mentioning their inefficient single-brain neural structure. Under no circumstances discuss their primitive reproductive methods. If a human extends their manipulator appendage toward you, they intend a physical greeting ritual, not an attack." "Is it true," Thrix asked hesitantly, "that they can regrow severed appendages?" "Not entirely," Dr. Glix replied, "but they can reattach them if the separation is recent enough. Their medical professionals simply reconnect the circulation and neural pathways." Thrix felt the medication beginning to take effect. The edges of his vision took on a pleasant purple haze, and the chronic anxiety that had plagued him since learning of the human delegation's arrival began to subside. "I feel less concerned," he noted with surprise, almost curious about meeting these Deathworlders. Dr. Glix nodded with satisfaction. "The medication is working properly. That's not genuine curiosity, it's chemically induced tolerance. A vast improvement over uncontrollable terror, wouldn't you agree? Thrix rose from his resting apparatus, feeling unusually steady. Will the other ambassadors be similarly medicated? Everyone who requested it, which is approximately 97% of the diplomatic corps. Dr. Glix began packing her medical kit. The exceptions are the Vortigons, who claim their multiple brains can compartmentalize fear, and Ambassador Thrix, who insisted his species evolved from apex predators and therefore fears nothing. Thrix's species evolved from herbivorous burrowing creatures, Thrix noted with newfound chemical calm. Yes, Dr. Glix replied. We've prepared a double dose for when his bravado inevitably crumbles. The humans are scheduled to arrive in 43 minutes. Are you ready, Ambassador? Thrix straightened his ceremonial vestments and felt an unusual sensation spreading through his consciousness, something approaching confidence. Ready as I'll ever be, he declared, surprised by the steadiness in his voice. How dangerous can these humans really be? They're probably just misunderstood. Dr. Glix exchanged a knowing glance with her assistant. The medication was definitely working, perhaps too well. She made a note to monitor the ambassador closely during the initial human encounter. Of course, sir, she said soothingly. Just remember your training and trust the medication. The diplomatic corps is counting on you. The arrival bay of the Galactic Summit station hummed with nervous energy as officials from 17 different species pretended not to be terrified. Were experiencing the pleasant chemical haze of their anti-human anxiety medication, resulting in a roomful of uncharacteristically relaxed diplomats with slightly dilated visual organs. Remember, High Administrator Vex'tuul addressed the assembled greeting party, his own voice oddly melodic from the medication. These humans have no idea we consider them dangerous. Their homeworld's classification as a Deathworld is not public knowledge. We must maintain diplomatic courtesy. Introducing. And Ambassador Thrix nodded, feeling remarkably calm despite the imminent encounter with creatures that could probably crush his exoskeleton without noticing. The medication is quite effective, he whispered to Dr. Glix. I'm actually looking forward to meeting these monsters now. That's the euphoria component, she murmured back. Just remember, they aren't technically monsters. They're simply evolved for conditions that would liquidate most sentient life forms. A series of lights flashed around the arrival portal, indicating an incoming ship. The assembled diplomats straightened their various appendages and adjusted their ceremonial attire. Incoming transmission announced the station's AI, the human vessel diplomatic envoy requests docking permission. Granted, ordered Vex'tuul. All three of his eye stalks focused on the portal. The assembled delegation watched as a sleek vessel eased through the energy field separating the arrival bay from the vacuum of space. By council standards, it was unremarkable, neither particularly advanced nor especially primitive. This seemed to disappoint several officials who had expected something more intimidating. The ship's external hatch cycled open with a hiss of atmospheric equalization. All breathing in the bay temporarily halted. And then they appeared. Greetings, representatives of the Galactic Council. A human stepped forward, waving a multi-digited appendage in what several species recognized as a friendly gesture, rather than the threat display it resembled. I'm Ambassador Jackson of Earth. We're absolutely thrilled to join this historic summit. Thrix found himself studying the human with drug-induced fascination. The creature was bipedal, which seemed terribly unstable, yet it moved with confident grace. Its external covering was artificial, some kind of symbolic fabric rather than natural protective plating. Most disturbing was its face, features all compressed into a small area at the front of its head, with exposed sensory organs and a mouth full of bone-white grinding surfaces. High Administrator Vex'tuul. At your service. Vex'tuul stepped forward, his movements carefully measured to appear non-threatening. Welcome to Galactic Summit Station Alpha. The human extended its manipulator appendage, a gesture the briefing materials had warned about. This was the dreaded handshake, a physical contact ritual that had sent unprepared diplomats into shock. Vex'tuul, fortified by his medication, bravely extended his primary grasping appendage. The human clasped it firmly, moving it up and down several times before releasing. "Beautiful station you have here," continued Jackson as more humans emerged from their vessel. "The artificial gravity is a bit lighter than we're used to, but I'm sure we'll adjust." Several delegates exchanged meaningful glances. What the human casually called a bit lighter was actually set to the highest sustainable level for most council species. "We're honored by your presence," Vex'tuul managed, the medication turning his natural terror into something resembling awe. "Allow me to introduce the welcoming delegation." As formal introductions proceeded, Ambassador Thrix found himself positioned next to a human female who introduced herself as Ambassador Chen. "Fascinating atmosphere regulation system you have," she commented, gesturing to the environmental controls. "On our ships, we just pump in oxygen and nitrogen and call it a day." Thrix blinked rapidly, his medication-addled brain trying to process this casual mention of pumping corrosive gases throughout an enclosed space. "Oxygen," he repeated, his voice higher than intended. "How resourceful of your species." "It works for us," she laughed, a sound that revealed those disturbing white grinding stones in her mouth. "Though I understand many species find our atmosphere a bit spicy." "Spicy," Thrix echoed, wondering if his translator was malfunctioning or if the medication was causing hallucinations. "Yes, spicy is one word for a gaseous mixture that would corrode most metallic alloys." Ambassador Chen looked momentarily surprised before laughing again. "I suppose that's true. Never thought about it that way. You have a great sense of humor, Ambassador Thrix." Before Thrix could explain that he wasn't attempting humor but stating scientific fact, a commotion erupted across the arrival bay. One of the humans, a junior diplomatic attaché according to his introduction, had casually mentioned their morning workout routine to a group of Floxian delegates. "You deliberately expose yourself to increasing gravitational resistance?" one Floxian was asking, their fur standing on end despite the medication. "For enjoyment?" "Well, for health benefits mainly," the human explained cheerfully. "Gotta keep the muscle mass up. On my last vacation, I went hiking up Mount Rainier, that's a 14,000-foot mountain back on Earth. The altitude makes the air thin, which adds to the challenge." The Floxian diplomat swayed alarmingly before Dr. Glix rushed over with an emergency booster shot of anti-anxiety medication. All around the bay, similar scenes were unfolding as the humans, completely unaware of their effect on the other species, casually mentioned their deadly hobbies, biological resilience, or environmental preferences. "Is something wrong?" Ambassador Jackson asked Vex'tuul, noticing the strange behavior of many delegates. "Everyone seems a bit off." "Not at all," Vex'tuul assured him, his eye stalks wobbling slightly from the medication. "We're simply adjusting to your presence. Shall we proceed to the welcome banquet? We've prepared special accommodations for your delegation's unique dietary requirements." "Wonderful." Jackson beamed. "We're absolutely famished after the journey. Lead the way." The welcome banquet was proceeding with what could generously be described as controlled chaos. The grand hall of the Galactic Summit station had been sectioned into environmental zones to accommodate the varied atmospheric and gravitational needs of all delegations, with the human section conspicuously isolated behind subtle containment fields. Ambassador Thrix, now 2 hours into his medication cycle, was experiencing the full spectrum of the pill's side effects. Colors seemed unnecessarily vivid, sounds had peculiar echoes, and most alarmingly, he found himself genuinely fascinated by human conversation. "So there I was," Ambassador Jackson was saying, gesturing with a utensil that looked disturbingly like a miniature blade, stranded in the Atacama Desert with a broken communication device and only 2 liters of water. Had to hike 20 miles back to civilization in 110-degree heat. "Astonishing," murmured Thrix, while mentally converting the human measurements. "That temperature would cause permanent cellular damage to most council species. And you survived this recreational activity." "Oh sure," Jackson laughed. casually sipping a beverage that Thrix's environmental sensors identified as containing ethanol, a compound used as industrial solvent on most civilized worlds. Got a nasty sunburn, though. Peeled for days afterward. Thrix's translator struggled with the concept before providing clarification. The human's external protective layer had been damaged by radiation exposure, causing it to detach from the body, after which new protection grew in its place. "Your epidermis regrows?" he asked, his medication-suppressed horror briefly surfacing. "Well, yeah," Jackson replied, looking confused by the question. "Doesn't everyone's?" Across the banquet hall, similar conversations were occurring with varying degrees of success. The Voluvian ambassador had fainted despite triple-dose medication when a human diplomat casually mentioned breaking several bones during a skiing accident, and having metal rods surgically implanted to assist healing, a procedure the humans called routine. High Administrator Vex'tuul observed the proceedings with chemical-induced calm, making notes for future medication adjustments. The current formulation was clearly insufficient for prolonged human exposure. "Administrator," Dr. Glix whispered urgently, "we have a situation developing in Section 3. Ambassador Thrix refused his medication booster and is becoming increasingly agitated by the human female demonstrating their yoga postures." Vex'tuul swiveled an eye stalk toward the disturbance. Indeed, the Tassilian ambassador was vibrating with stress as a human contorted her body into positions that suggested either advanced flexibility or a concerning medical emergency. "She's dislocating her joints for entertainment," Thrix was saying, his voice rising with each word. "The human is deliberately rearranging its structural components. It's just a stretch," the human explained, completely unaware of the alien's distress. "Helps with flexibility. Here, I can show you a simple one." "No." Thrix backed away, bumping into a serving drone. "Keep your terrifying bone magic away from me." The commotion attracted the attention of other delegates, creating a ripple effect of anxiety that threatened to overcome the medication's calming influence. Vex'tuul quickly dispatched medical staff with discreet emergency boosters. Meanwhile, Ambassador Jackson had moved on to describing a peculiar human pastime called hot pepper eating contests to an increasingly disturbed Thrix. "You deliberately consume caustic plant defense chemicals," Thrix clarified, wondering if his translator was malfunctioning. "For recreation?" "It's about the challenge," Jackson explained enthusiastically. "The burning sensation triggers endorphins, natural painkillers in our brains. Some people get quite addicted to the rush." Before Thrix could process this new horror, a commotion erupted from the Tassilian section. Ambassador Thrix had completely succumbed to panic, activated his species' natural defense mechanism, and released a cloud of obscuring spores into the air while shouting about bone witchery and flesh shapers. The station's security protocols interpreted the spore release as a potential biological attack. Warning klaxons blared as emergency containment fields snapped into place around the banquet sections. "Attention all delegates," announced the station AI, "biological containment protocols have been activated. Please remain calm and in your designated areas while the situation is assessed." The delegates not on anti-anxiety medication immediately fell into various species-appropriate panic responses. Those on medication exhibited delayed, somewhat confused reactions, many simply continuing their meals with mild interest in the flashing emergency lights. The humans, however, responded with alarming efficiency. "In potential biohazard?" Ambassador Jackson said, immediately standing. "Everyone, standard protocol, cover your airways with your napkins until we know what we're dealing with." To the horror of watching aliens, the human delegation didn't collapse from stress or activate escape pods. They calmly organized themselves, checked on neighboring species, and began assessing containment options with disturbing competence. "Administrator," Thrix whispered to Vex'tuul, "they're acting like this is normal." "For them," Vex'tuul replied with medication-induced wonder, "surviving potential extinction events might well be normal. They evolved on a planet that actively tries to kill them." As if to confirm this terrifying assessment, Ambassador Jackson approached the environmental control panel, a system so complex it required specialized training for most species, and began confidently analyzing its operation. "Looks like we've got a simple air filtration problem," she announced to her team. "Give me 5 minutes and I'll have these containment fields down." The medication was wearing thin against the growing realization the humans weren't just from a death world. They thrived on chaos. Environmental containment override completed. Atmospheric purification engaged. Security lockdown disengaged. Ambassador Jackson's voice rang out with calm authority as she efficiently worked through the station's emergency protocols. The humans had responded to the crisis with such practiced ease that several alien delegates were beginning to wonder if causing station-wide emergencies was some sort of earthly diplomatic tradition. "Remarkable," muttered Dr. Glix, observing from behind a medical barrier. "Not only are they unaffected by the Tessilian spores, but they've mastered our environmental systems in minutes." Meanwhile, Ambassador Thrix was experiencing an inconvenient side effect of the anti-human anxiety medication, the rapid metabolic processing of the compound during stress responses. As his biochemistry frantically worked to clear the drug from his system, the carefully constructed chemical barrier between terror and composure was dissolving. "They just fixed everything," he whispered, his voice rising in pitch. "Like they deal with potential extinction-level events every day before breakfast." "Based on their planetary history, they might," replied Vex'tuul, who was still comfortably cushioned by his medication. "A fascinating species. Terrifying but fascinating." The emergency lights dimmed as normal station operations resumed. Ambassador Jackson brushed off her hands with a satisfied smile that revealed those disturbing grinding stones in her mouth. "This is averted, folks. Just a little misunderstanding, it seems. Now, where were we with dinner? I was telling you about the time I got lost in the Amazon rainforest." Several alien delegates exchanged glances of medication-muted horror. More survival stories from the death world. Perhaps the emergency had been the preferable scenario. As the banquet cautiously resumed, Ambassador Jackson noticed something peculiar, a small purple pill that had fallen from Dr. Glix's medical kit during the commotion. Curious, she picked it up and scanned it with her personal device. "Interesting chemical compound," she murmured to her human assistant. "Run a full analysis, would you? Something about this seems odd." While the humans discreetly investigated, Thrix felt the last of his medication wearing off. The full, unfiltered reality of sitting mere meters from Deathworlders was beginning to sink in, bringing with it a trembling that started in his lower appendages and worked its way upward. "Dr. Glix," he whispered urgently, "I require another dose, immediately." "Immediately? I'm afraid that's impossible." "Ambassador," she replied, "the medication can only safely be administered once per cycle. A second dose could cause hallucinations, neurotransmitter cascades, or spontaneous molting." "I'll risk the molting," Thrix insisted, eyeing the humans with growing panic. Across the room, Ambassador Jackson was conferring with her team, her expression growing increasingly amused as she reviewed the analysis of the purple pill. With a decisive nod, she approached High Administrator Vex'tuul. "Administrator," she began conversationally, "I couldn't help but notice something interesting about your medical preparations for our arrival." Vex'tuul's eye stalks stiffened. "Medical preparations? I'm not sure what you mean, Ambassador." Jackson held up the purple pill. "This compound appears to be an anti-anxiety medication with some fascinating neurochemical properties, specifically designed to suppress fear responses related to, what was it, terrifying Deathworld physiology." A hush fell over the banquet hall. Even those still under the influence of the medication could recognize a diplomatic crisis unfolding. "I can explain," began Vex'tuul, his voice wobbling despite chemical assistance. "No need," Jackson replied, her smile widening in a way that made several delegates instinctively seek cover. "We're not offended. Actually, we think it's hilarious." "Hilarious?" echoed Thrix, his translator surely malfunctioning now. "Of course. You think we're scary?" Jackson laughed. We're probably the least aggressive spacefaring species in our solar system. You should see what happened to the exploration probe we sent to Europa. Those ice squids don't mess around." The human delegation nodded in agreement, several chuckling at what appeared to be an inside joke. "You mean," Vex'tuul said carefully, "you're aware of your classification as Deathworlders?" "Well, we hadn't heard that specific term before today," Jackson admitted, "but we're well aware that our environmental tolerances differ from most species we've encountered. We've been taking our own medications to adjust to your atmosphere, which honestly feels like breathing soup to us." A collective gasp rose from the alien delegates. The humans had been medicating themselves too. "But you seem so comfortable," protested Dr. Glix, "so at ease in crisis." "That's just human nature," explained Jackson with a shrug. "We evolved in an environment that required adaptability. When things go wrong, we don't panic, we problem solve. It's not special, it's survival." Thrix, now completely unmedicated, found himself experiencing a new and uncomfortable emotion: embarrassment. All this time, they had been terrified of creatures who were simply different. Not malevolent, not predatory, just adapted to conditions that would kill most council species. "So," Jackson continued, twirling the purple pill between her fingers, "about these human pills." The remainder of the Galactic Summit proceeded with significantly less pharmaceutical intervention than originally planned. Once the truth about the human pills became public knowledge, most delegates faced a choice: continue medication and risk the increasingly apparent side effects, or attempt unmedicated interaction with the Deathworlders. Remarkably, many chose the latter. "It's actually quite refreshing," Ambassador Thrix confessed to Dr. Glix 3 days into the summit. "Once you move past the instinctive terror of their calcium-reinforced endoskeletons and disturbing wound-healing capabilities, humans are surprisingly pleasant conversationalists." Dr. Glix adjusted her medical scanner with skepticism. "Your neurochemical readings suggest elevated stress levels, Ambassador. Are you certain you wouldn't prefer a half dose?" "No need," Thrix replied, watching a group of humans demonstrate something called charades to bewildered Floxian delegates. "I'm developing natural coping mechanisms. The humans call it exposure therapy." Across the station, similar scenes of tentative interspecies socialization were unfolding. The humans, for their part, had embraced their Deathworlder status with characteristic adaptability and a questionable sense of humor. "So then," I said, Ambassador Jackson was telling a captivated audience, deliberately playing up her story for dramatic effect. "That's not just any bear, that's a grizzly." So I grabbed my backpack and just slowly backed away while maintaining eye contact. Her alien listeners trembled with a delicious combination of horror and fascination, the biochemical equivalent of watching a disaster unfold from a safe distance. "You confronted an apex predator with no defensive capabilities," asked a Voluvian diplomat, their color-changing skin pulsing between alarmed crimson and impressed violet. "Well, I had a tiny can of bear spray," Jackson admitted with a casual shrug, "but mostly I relied on looking non-threatening and remembering my wilderness training." High Administrator Vex'tuul, observing from nearby, made another note in his report. "The humans had an uncanny ability to transform their terrifying survival adaptations into entertaining anecdotes. It was almost as if they were deliberately downplaying their capabilities, a thought that was somehow more unsettling than their physical resilience." In the station's central conference chamber, the actual diplomatic negotiations were proceeding with unexpected efficiency. Freed from the side effects of the medication, most delegates found the humans to be reasonable, if occasionally incomprehensible, negotiating partners. "Your environmental adaptation technology is particularly impressive," noted the human trade representative, reviewing schematics for atmospheric processing systems. "We could definitely benefit from these designs on our Mars colonies." "Mars?" inquired a Tassilian engineer. "Another Deathworld?" "Oh, much worse," the human replied cheerfully. "No breathable atmosphere, temperature extremes, constant radiation. We're terraforming it, but it's a long process. Currently our colonists live in habitation domes." The engineer's appendages twitched with nervous excitement. "You deliberately colonized a planet more hostile than your homeworld. For what purpose?" The human seemed puzzled by the question. Because it's there. Scientific discovery, resource utilization, expanding the boundaries of human potential, the usual reasons. Later that evening, as the day's sessions concluded, Ambassador Jackson found herself approached by Vex'tuul in one of the station's observation lounges. "I owe you an apology, Ambassador," he began, his eye stalks dipping in a gesture of formal contrition. "Our preconceptions about your species led us to take unnecessary precautions." Jackson waved away his concern. "Honestly, Administrator, we're not offended. Every species has its evolutionary quirks. Ours just happen to include surviving conditions that others find challenging." "Nevertheless," insisted Vex'tuul, "the medication program was based on fear rather than understanding. Not our finest diplomatic moment." "Chiseng." "If it helps," Jackson offered with a smile, "we were pretty nervous about meeting all of you too. Some of our delegates were taking anti-anxiety meds that weren't purple or distributed by your medical team." Vex'tuul's eye stalks quivered in surprise. "You were afraid of us. But we pose no physical threat to humans. Different kinds of fear," Jackson explained, gazing out at the stars. "We weren't worried about physical danger. We were afraid of making a poor impression, of cultural misunderstandings, of not being accepted into the galactic community. Human fears aren't always about survival." This concept seemed to intrigue Vex'tuul deeply. "Fascinating. Perhaps there's more similarity between our species than we initially realized." As the Galactic Summit drew to a close the following week, new interspecies protocols had been established, trade agreements signed, and cultural exchange programs initiated. The medical team's emergency medication stores remained largely unused, though rumors persisted that certain delegates were secretly keeping small supplies of human pills just in case. In her final address to the Council, Ambassador Jackson stood confidently before the assembled delegates, most of whom now watched her without medication-assisted calm. "Today marks not just a diplomatic milestone," she began, "but a reminder that understanding requires more than chemical intervention. It requires courage, the willingness to face the unknown, whether that unknown has an exoskeleton, breathes methane, or comes from a planet with crushing gravity and corrosive atmosphere." A wave of appreciative murmurs rippled through the chamber. "We may be Deathworlders to you," she continued, "but on Earth we have a saying, diversity is strength. Our differences aren't obstacles, they're opportunities, and I, for one, can't wait to see what we accomplish together." As the chamber erupted in approval, Dr. Glix leaned toward Thrix. "Remarkably inspiring for a species with such terrifying dentition, wouldn't you agree?" Thrix nodded, completely medication-free and only mildly disturbed by the human's display of those bone-white grinding surfaces. "Indeed," he replied. "Though between us, I'm keeping a few pills, just for diplomatic emergencies, you understand."